Welcome to the Holding Time podcast. Here we discuss breastfeeding in all its complexity, the ups and downs, the challenges and the triumphs. Whether you are expectant, a new mother, or simply interested, I hope you'll appreciate the incredible warrior women featured in this series. In this mini-series, we go back to feature some mothers who helped to shape the Holding Time project in Coventry. These interviews took place over Zoom in 2020, quite often under lockdown. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Find out more by visiting holdingtime.org or support us on our Patreon channel, Holding Time.
So about 8 years ago, I developed ITP, which is immune thrombocytopenia purpura.
Wow.
So it took me a year to learn how to say that. So it's where your immune system attacks your platelet count. So that's how thick your blood is. So I spent, because it was chronic, because it wouldn't go away. So I spent a couple of years on steroids, kind of living in the house, not going out. Every time they tried to take me off the medication, it would collapse again and I'd be back to square one. When your levels drop below 20, they're supposed to be between 150 and 400. You can just bleed internally anywhere like the brain or the stomach or anywhere that's like an open valve kind of blood flow. So I had a splenectomy 6 years ago, which put me in remission. But there's no guarantee because it's like a Russian roulette on whether or not the body will continue that pattern. It can start again in other organs. So they basically like, if you pass the 5-year mark with your splenectomy and it's not come back, then it's probably never going to come back. But then there's been some people who've been in remission for 10 years and then suddenly they get another infection and it randomly comes back. So I've still technically got the condition, but the organ where it happens isn't there anymore.
Wow.
Which is why they say something can kind of like trigger the body to continue doing it in another organ, if that makes sense.
So being pregnant must have been kind of a risk then. Or did they say that you wouldn't ever get pregnant? Or
because they don't know why it happens, which is why it's called idiopathic. Once the pattern sticks, it tends to just always stick in the body. Like when you've got an antibody, you always know, like the body always knows how to fight that thing. It's similar with this because your body essentially creates antibodies to platelets for yourself. So women either suddenly out of nowhere become really, really well in pregnancy or they absolutely collapse and come out of remission, and I didn't know which I'd be. So it was kind of suggested just not. It wasn't a great idea to get pregnant, and then if I did, I'd have to be monitored very closely.
So is that what happened?
Yeah. Fortunately, my platelets didn't start dropping until 2 months before I was due, and I had enough of a range, like enough platelets that it could drop a bit without it being too bad. And then as soon as I gave birth, they shot right up and were way too high, and now they've evened out.
Oh, wow.
So I'm like in that percentage where it just made me better.
Oh, wow.
Which is really great. Yeah.
Got a miracle baby in lockdown.
Yeah.
Oh, amazing.
I always knew I wanted to breastfeed. I wasn't sure if I'd pass the condition over to Marlon, and they had to take blood from his umbilical cord to test whether or not I'd given him the condition, and I haven't, which is amazing.
Oh.
So there's definitely something to pregnancy, and I'm still well now, and this is the first time I've been well for like 8-9 years. So
wow.
Definitely something about pregnancy that's made me well, and breastfeeding. And so I decided that that was important because I've got so many autoimmune conditions in the family. I just wanted to make sure that he had like the best possible chance.
I mean, for your immune system, I think vaginal birth and breastfeeding is the best recipe that nature's come up with, isn't it?
Yeah. We've got loads of autoimmune in my family, so I think it probably would have happened anyway.
Genetic predisposition towards it. What the question is whether or not being breastfed or not being breastfed contributes to that manifesting itself, you know, whatever it is, cancer, heart disease, high blood pressure, autoimmune problems? You know, it's like, would those things have happened?
Me and my brother were both breastfed, but my other brother wasn't, and that brother died within 6 months.
Really?
Yeah, cot death. They didn't know why. There wasn't anything they could find. It was just cot death. He was the middle between my brother and me, and it's just because my mum was just so unwell, she just couldn't breastfeed at all. Whereas with me, I was breastfed for 6 to 12 months. Because she'd lost a baby before, she just took off the time to do it. Whereas my brother was maybe only breastfed for about 3 months, and I would say that his autoimmune has been present his entire life, whereas mine, I think I was just predisposed to it. But I know that mine was mainly linked to I lived somewhere with loads of toxic black mold.
Oh, really?
So I know that that's linked with this. I know that taking on yoga as a practice daily,
yoga's really
changed my health.
Yeah, me too. I started doing yoga when I was 19. And
it's more than just the physical, isn't it? It encompasses all of the body.
Well, it means union. It's that thing of connecting with that other self, whatever that is. But you do find it sometimes, don't you, in a yoga class? You do sort of meet yourself, even if it's just for a second. It's a bit like the feeling you have. I mean, I think when you're on holiday and you're like floating in the water and there's a bird flies above you or you see a fish, it's the same sort of moment of unity and being that I think we need that for wellness. There is this sort of spiritual element to breastfeeding that often isn't.
It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I've got a friend who has been breastfeeding for 2 years, and I remember thinking, I'm not going to do that. That's awful. And now I'm doing it. I'm like, no, I think stopping breastfeeding will really affect me mentally. I need to keep going.
Really interesting to hear, because I think that too. I think breastfeeding is, in a way, it's sort of equivalent to floating, you know, or yoga.
Absolutely.
That's kind of what I wanted to catch, in a way. It's like catching a butterfly, to catch that in the portraits, to catch that sort of moment of absolute kind of perfect intimacy and stillness that breastfeeding can offer. You know, that's why I didn't want to do a documentary project with like women with slings cooking dinner. You know, it's like, for me, that's not what is amazing about breastfeeding. Yes, it's possible, but it's not enjoyable.
When I breastfeed like that, I feel like I've been robbed of the moment a little bit, because I can do all that and sometimes I have to do that. But yeah, it feels like I've been robbed of that moment. You want every single time you breastfeed to be, okay, let's light the candles and be quiet and still and nice, because it just has that vibe about it. And it kind of, I feel, deserves that quiet and respect, and it's not always possible. But yeah, there's definitely a feeling of being robbed when I can't do it that way.
I never thought that I would enjoy being awake in the middle of the night. And yet, you know, lots of women say that those nighttime feeds are really special. And perhaps it's because that's when you get that absolute stillness. The house is still, the street is still, the animals outside are still, you know.
I haven't been doing the night shifts for like 6 months, the entire time. As my husband's like whispering in my ear, you haven't been doing that, I've been doing that. I had to go back to work after 6 weeks, so I've got a super duper expressor, so I feed throughout the day and then I was
He gets to do the night feeds. That was kind of nice though that you share that with him.
He both loves and hates it. He says he loves looking after him and he loves having that, but he's also severely sleep deprived. I was self-employed and I couldn't lose the contract, and it just was what it was. I mean, I've been able to work from home the entire time, but I just had to be on it all day. So, but it does mean that I've been able to just breastfeed throughout all of the appointments and kind of deadlines and stuff, which is great. But yeah, he's very kindly pretty much been doing, I think I've done like 4 nights or something in 6 months.
That is nice though. I mean, it's also quite good for your health in that sense that you've got that support at night and you can rest.
I am sure that this whole experience of pregnancy and breastfeeding but also still being able to sleep a good 6-7 hours at night has made me a very robust, healthy person. Before I got pregnant, I had just had my tonsils out, and I swear my tonsils, because they'd been infected on and off for 12 months, and I was on antibiotics, and I mean hefty dosages. I'd be on them for like a month, and then I'd come off for 2 weeks and I'd have to go back on them. So I was pretty much living on hefty dosages of antibiotics. That's because of the splenectomy. I pick up an infection and I just cannot get rid of it. And I've had sepsis twice in like 3 years. And as soon as I had those tonsils out and I was off the antibiotics, I had them out mid-October, start of December I was pregnant. And we'd been using the same method, which was like Natural Cycles app. I probably, if I was a healthy person, would have got pregnant very quickly on that. But I think there was something with the antibiotics and with the infections. My body was just saying, no, we can't. We can't house something else. And as soon as it all went away, within a month and a half, I was pregnant. And then I thought it was the tonsillectomy that had made me really well. And I think it did in part, but suddenly out of nowhere, December onwards, I just felt amazing. And I spent 2.5 months not knowing why, and then realising, oh, I've been pregnant for 2.5 months. There was a definitive change, and I know when I got pregnant now, and there was a definitive change in my health.
So much about women's bodies that's incredibly miraculous, and I think we do all these space probes and going to Mars and working out the beginning of the universe, and I sort of think, like, the big mysteries, a lot of them are still unsolved in terms of fertility, the brain, sleep. There's just so many aspects of human physiology that are still so utterly mysterious, and maybe there's an unwillingness to some degree, or maybe it's just logistically difficult to work out. For example, how is it that a woman can breastfeed 2 children, and one of them can be a newborn, and one of them can be a toddler, and the breast will produce colostrum for the newborn and then regular milk for the other one? I mean, how is it possible?
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's insane.
There's this great organisation called the Parenting Science Gang, and they conducted, I think it was the first experiment, to really look at mother's milk up to the age of 4, because women are constantly told there's no benefit to milk up to the age of 4. Parenting Science Gang was a citizen science programme where parents decided was the experiment they wanted to run. Then the science gang helped them organise the experiment. This experiment was express milk. It was measured, examined, dissected by this spectrometer, this amazing tool that analyses smoke. So the milk's turned into smoke and it analyses all the particles. And they wanted to know, is there a benefit to breastfeeding beyond, well, I mean, now women are constantly told there's no benefit to breastfeeding beyond 6 months, They wanted to know what's in toddler milk, basically. And what they found was so incredible, that breast milk is totally individualised. Every single feed was completely different to every other feed.
Okay.
And not only by child, but also the theory is it's by time of day. It's by whether or not that child has a cold, by whether or not that child has had a big meal yesterday. It is individualised to an extent that is beyond science.
Oh my God.
Yeah. The other thing they looked at was, okay, so does the milk change at 6 months? Formula companies are allowed to market milk from 6 months because that apparently is, the follow-on milk. That's when the milk changes. They market another milk that's at a year. They also analyse the formula. There's nothing different in that formula, really. Nothing meaningfully different from newborn to 6 months to a year, yeah. All the same milk. And the scientist drew this diagram of the ingredients, like the number of them in breast milk. And he showed us that on a chart, identifying all these different things. Plus he said there's just loads of stuff in there he can't identify. And then he showed us the same diagram for formula. And it was imagine being in the desert and looking up at the sky at a starry constellation. And then imagine being in the city centre and looking up at night. This is the difference between the two. And it is staggeringly different. So I think we're on the cusp of a great deal more understanding about breastfeeding and the long-term effects. You know, we have actually really been in the dark. And what the citizen science experiment did was it made a case for a longitudinal study of breastfeeding, and that will go ahead. And there's an organisation called the Human Milk Foundation that are trying to get that funded at Imperial College. When that happens, once those results come out, it's going to revolutionise everything.
Yeah.
Because basically breast milk is not food, it's a drug. And it has a kind of massively medicinal, miraculous purpose for the child that you can't describe as food. It's not considered a drug because children aren't considered ill, but actually the components in it are so complex that it should be seen as medicine, and there's no way that formula is giving that child anything in comparison. And the problem for me, having learned all of this, I learned all of this in the course of doing this work, is that, you know, I can see why women use formula. I see all the reasons why women use formula, and I really sympathise. And my child was on formula, and I had a tongue-tied baby, and I had no support, and I had a child that screamed on the breast, and I expressed, and I mean, it's kind of amazing that I did end up breastfeeding, really. It was almost by accident, because she was bottle fed for 4 months. Mm. But now that I've learned all this stuff, you can't unlearn it. It's hard not to be evangelical about breastfeeding, but I suppose as an artist, you just make the work and you hope that over time it resonates.
I'm feeling a bit guilty now that he has formula sometimes.
No, you shouldn't, because I think that the amazing effects of breast milk are there. I think you only need 200 ml a day.
Well, he
was
exclusively breastfed for about 4 months, and then unfortunately at the end of December he got viral meningitis.
Oh no, really?
He'd had a fever of like 39 and was rushed into hospital.
Wow.
And I tried to stay through the night with him, and I was basically told, you need to go home and your husband needs to swap because we've got COVID patients here.
Yeah.
So I had a friend who drove me in twice a day, and I just sat at home for 5 days on my own, just expressing as much as I could.
Oh.
And then I probably did about 3/4 of the feeds off me, and then he just had to top up with formula.
That's what formula's for, you know. I mean, that is literally why formula is there. I mean, short of running out and finding another breastfeeding mother, how else would you have fed him?
Yeah, basically.
You have to use formula.
But then it's stuck.
You know, it does genuinely have a role to play, and you should never feel bad about it. God, that's what's so fraught. That's what I mean. It's really hard because you start talking about the benefits, and then mothers just end up feeling really guilty. You're just made you feel guilty, even though you're actually breastfeeding your child.
You know, hospital. It was a different thing. He was in hospital, and it was, how do we get through this? I can give you this much breast milk, and then you've got to top it.
Yeah.
And it just stuck because he got used to going between the two, and now we're introducing a little bit of food, and, you know, I might give him a bit of Weetabix, and I can't get the milk out of my breast quick enough to fill the bowl, so we use a bit of formula.
Yeah, but it's
happily interchanging, but I feed him his first feed in the morning at 7, and then between 5 and 11 I'll cluster feed with him. He has 2 or 3 formula feeds with food in between in the daytime when I'm working. And I've been super lucky that he's totally happy, maybe because we introduced not formula but bottle at night with Dad with my expressed right in the beginning, that he's really happy to breastfeed off me, to have my milk in a bottle, to have a bit of food, to have a bit of food, and he just interchanges without any problems at all.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is ideal because you've got a lot of freedom in that scenario. And anyway, he's 6 months, he's starting to eat food, he's going to be having some form of other milk, isn't he? Some children don't like other forms of milk, like they won't.
Yogurt, yeah.
Yeah. You really shouldn't feel bad about it, honestly. That's just awful. I made you feel bad.
No, you haven't made me feel bad. It's been an odd one, my breastfeeding experience, because I was like, this is what I'm going to do, and it's only going to be breast, because I was very autoimmune conscious. And then I actually had the opposite, where a lot of the midwives were basically saying, you need to introduce formula. How are you feeding? And I'm like, well, I'm following a sleep schedule because I just needed to with work. And he got onto it really easily and well, which was great. The feeds and the naps were kind of set more in stone, but he was never hungry. It worked where you basically never let them get too hungry or too tired, and then they go into naps easier. So it was a very controlled way of feeding, but he was totally happy, and he would always get a bit hungry at the same time. So it was working for both of us. But my health visitor was not nice about it, and she's basically like, no, you have to feed whenever he wants it. Let him tell you when he wants it, and you should be feeding as long as he wants to. And I'm like, well, I've got to work and stuff. I'm feeding him every sort of hour and a half, 2 hours on this schedule. After like half an hour, I just kind of call that quits because I've got to get on with my day. No, it's got to be led by the baby. And if that's the way you're doing it, you're not feeding him enough. He's not as heavy as he should be and all this sort of stuff. You've got to introduce formula because this isn't working. And I was like, well, so I had the opposite experience where people were just constantly telling me, no, you're obviously not coping. Give him formula. He needs more. He needs more. I'm like, well, why does he need more? Because he's not telling me he needs any more. You're using this graph and you're telling me that you think he should be fatter, but he's not telling me that. He's happy and he's fine and he's content. And he never screams and he sleeps when he's supposed to. So like, bugger off. But I had that up until about 4 months. It's 3 or 4 months the health visitor was coming, and she kept coming every week and telling me, well, he's a little bit under. I'm like, yeah, but no offence, but your scales, he's like 1 line under or something on the scale, which apparently is still okay, but they want him to be on the line or above. I'm like, well, but is this judged on formula babies? Because formula babies are fatter. And me and my husband are like naturally quite slim, and he's a very long baby. And I'm like, maybe that's just his shape.
I think things with health visitors can be quite difficult. I hear more issues with health visitors than with midwives. I mean, some women have really difficult births, and so they have issues with midwives about that. But when it comes to feeding and the postnatal, I think midwives, because they are medically trained, they seem to get it right more often. Yeah. Health visitors seem to get it wrong quite often. I mean, some people report their health visitors been, I think it's just very hit and miss, isn't it? I don't know what their training is. But
it feels like a midwife and social worker.
Yeah. It does feel like a kind of interfering aunt who comes round and sort of undermines you. You had someone coming weekly, which you're the first person I've ever heard of that's had someone weekly, and it sounds like she was interfering and meddling.
Because I had a bad birth, and so he'd had pethidine and an epidural forceps, he was really out of it, and they wouldn't let me leave the hospital until they'd seen me breastfeed, but he just didn't want to breastfeed for the first 3 days. And as soon as he kind of woke up properly, he latched without a problem, but in those first couple of days he lost loads of weight because of that. But they took it really seriously, which is fine, but it meant that I had someone visiting every week. And because I was going back to work so quickly, the health visitor kind of took it upon herself to keep coming to see if I was okay. But she was asking me really personal questions. How are you coping? How are you going to do this? What's your mental health going to be like? What's your finances like? I was like, this just isn't appropriate. I was so stressed. I was genuinely stressed with my health visitor coming round.
Yeah.
And she wanted to watch me breastfeed to check that I was able to do that because I was refusing to give formula. She's like, I need to see you breastfeed. And I'm thinking, is that normal? Yeah. Shall I just do it to get you to go away? And it's really, that was in the first couple of weeks of giving birth, and it was really, I felt really vulnerable. And I've just got this woman sitting on the edge of the chair staring at me breastfeeding and trying to give me tips. And I'm like, we're fine. We're happy. I don't want your tips. I get that you've got a list of stuff that you want to run through with every woman and you just repeat the same thing wherever you are, but we're happy.
Yeah, it's disempowering. There's still all these taboos and stigmas that people aren't really able to voice. So, because they've got this job to do and they're trying to do it in a certain way. And And then other women who can tick all those boxes might be really suffering. It's really nice to meet you, Hannah, and take it easy. Go easy on yourself.
Yeah, I'll try.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to everyone involved, our funders, the Infant Feeding Team and University Hospital Coventry and Warwick for their support, along with all the amazing mothers and partners who helped to make this project happen. You can learn more about the project by visiting holdingtime.org and support us on our Patreon channel. There's a link in the description. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like, follow or subscribe so you don't miss any of our content.